Chapter 19. The Final Secret. "Ravana is gone. They have outwitted her." The keeper of the fire crackled with delight. Their desire to learn was greater than her ability to undermine them. They were not deceived by her illusions, even when she was tampering with their feelings. The keeper of the air whispered, "They did well." It is finally time for us to play our part in the last great scene. The keeper of the water looked at each of the other keepers, reassuring herself that they were ready. "Now for the final secret," said the keeper of the earth. "The human spirit expresses itself through the physical world and within time. To truly regenerate, these children must turn their awareness away from the mechanics of matter, from the grasp of time, the clutter of sound, and the limits even of their own breath. As they have practiced with their meditation," said the keeper of the water, "it will take one powerful thought." The keeper of the fire sparkled in anticipation. "It must be a strong thought, and they must have it in the same moment. Then," he smiled, knowing what would come next. "One breath, 1 second, 1 thought, 1 heartbeat," whispered the keeper of the air like a mantra. Her form was becoming wispier, anticipating the much-awaited return to her original pure state. "I know this is one of the hardest parts for you, dear friend." The keeper of the earth looked at water with empathy. "Now you must wash over everything, removing all traces of human debris." In spite of his sympathy, he was more excited than he had been in many, many years. "I know it must happen to allow for a fresh start." The keeper of the water smiled as they turned together to watch the final scene. The announcement of the school's closure came over the loudspeaker as students prepared to go home for the weekend. They were being sent home to an uncertain future. When the minivans arrived, the students looked like sleepwalkers, dragging their heels across the parking lot, their bags hanging off their shoulders and their heads lowered. The school was closing, definitely for the upcoming week, and possibly forever, due to the anticipated damage from the predicted earthquake. Solomon was waiting for Ben at the front entrance. Ben and Raj arrived together. "Wait for me on the bus, Ben," Solomon said, patting his brother on the back. "I'll be there in a minute." Ben waved goodbye to Raj and dutifully headed for the bus. "Hey," Raj said to Solomon, "aren't you leaving? Or are you planning to stay behind and take over the school?" His smile was warm, and Solomon smiled back. "Want to stay behind with me? I'm sure we could have this whole operation up and running by ourselves in no time," Solomon said. Then quietly he added, "By the way, thanks. Ben told me you helped him with his English homework the other day." "Well, the kid was struggling, all alone in the library. What could I do?" Raj waved away the gratitude. "He works hard, you know, but it's like he doesn't see the words right. Poor kid thinks he's stupid, but he's not." Raj hesitated for a moment. Maybe he should have his eyes tested. It was remarkably mundane to be speaking of eye tests at a time like this, but Solomon appreciated the normalcy of the conversation. He looked at Raj for a moment and wondered if they would ever see each other again. "Come on, let's get out of here," he said, steering Raj out the door. Emily slid into the back seat of the minivan and sidled up next to Tess. "Hey," she said in response to Tess's worried face. "You know, Tess, we can never die. Did you know that?" she said. "Ever." "What do you mean?" Tess asked, looking at her big sister intently. Tess was a practical person. Emily knew from past experience that her little sister preferred the hard truth to a sugar-coated lie. She remembered when their mum was leaving for a business trip once, and Tess had rushed to the front door distraught. Emily had thought at the time that Tess was crying because she would miss her mum, but instead, Emily heard Tess call out to her mum as she climbed into the taxi, "Mom, what do I do if you die?" Her mum had stopped. and turned to look directly at 7-year-old Tess and said, "If I die, the will is in the top drawer of the filing cabinet in a yellow file folder." "Okay," said Tess, calmed instantly by the useful information. "Bye, Mum," she said, and then ran carefree back to play with her friends. Emily looked at Tess now as the van drove down the long school driveway on its way into the city and said, "Well, a body can die, but the soul can't. So even if you leave this body, you will go into another one as a baby, and we will never lose each other." Tess considered this for a moment. But what if that baby is somewhere else in the world? How would you find it then?" Tess asked, wanting details. "I'm not really sure," Emily said, "but I think we just know how to find each other. Maybe we attract each other like magnets." Tess smiled. Earthquakes turn the soil in a way that releases nitrogen and other fertile elements. Surface level damage is the high cost paid for this regenerative action. In many parts of the world, fault lines were known to be active, and governments had spent years developing exit strategies. China sat at the junction of several tectonic plates, crossing the Pacific, Eurasian, and Indian Oceans. There were more than 150 fault lines, mostly inactive. However, something suddenly was activating all of them at the same time. This same phenomenon was occurring all over the world. Since all fault lines were active, there was no place to go. Many people were rushing out of Beijing, heading for the safe zones broadcast by the government, more than 200 miles from a fault line. Mei Ling and her mum were planning to leave Saturday evening by car with their neighbors. Emily's dad had managed to book plane tickets on the midnight flight to Canada. Raj's uncle, who was responsible for evacuating Indian nationals, would stay behind, but he had booked a flight for Raj to return to Delhi Saturday night. Solomon's mom had accepted the government's evacuation assistance, so they would be leaving Sunday morning. The international crisis rang as a wake-up call around the world. Newspapers were filled with stories of people helping each other to exit the most dangerous areas. Everywhere, radio stations sent messages of hope, encouraging people to take care of each other. It was described as an unprecedented shared global emergency, greater than either of the world wars. Some countries were fighting over land to house their evacuees. Amidst growing threats of violence and the possible use of nuclear force, the majority of the world's people were ignoring their governments and finding ways to help each other. There was a feeling of shared humanity that extended beyond borders, dispelling separation by race, nation, or religion. Everyone needed help. Emily knew it was time to meet her friends when she heard them calling in her head. It was an oddly familiar sensation, although she'd never experienced it before. It was a bit like feeling the presence of all three friends in her mind at the same time. Although she wasn't sure she would be back, she was confident Tess would be fine without her. She slipped out quietly, knowing her dad trusted her to take care of herself. Mei Ling put aside her packing when she heard a subtle whisper in her mind. Her mum was next door with the neighbors, planning tomorrow's trip. She wrote her mum a short note saying she would be back soon. Then she walked to the front gate of the apartment complex, where Raj was waiting for her in his limousine. "We'll pick up the others on the way," he said. Solomon had the sudden thought to leave and told his mum he was going out to get some air in the courtyard. As he was leaving, he thought about Ben and paused. He knew his little brother would be terrified if Solomon wasn't there with them. He found Ben lying on the bed in his room, almost asleep. "Ben, I'm going out for a bit," said Solomon, looking his brother in the eyes. "But I'll see you soon." He took off his basketball jacket and laid it over Ben like a blanket. "This'll keep you warm until I see you again." Ben smiled, a sleepy smile up at him. Then Solomon took a deep breath and walked away. The four friends stared out the windows from the back seat of Raj's limousine. Each was deep in thought. They didn't need to speak to know they were about to discover the final secret. They rode in silence for most of the trip. As they reached the outskirts of the city, Mei Ling said dreamily, "You know that beautiful presence I felt in the second secret when I heard the voice? I thought I felt it when I was falling asleep near the cup." She looked at her friends' faces to see if they were listening. "Then again, when I was with the little girl and the Buddha, I felt the same warm feeling inside and a pull upwards." She paused. "Have any of you ever felt it?" Raj looked sideways at her. "I felt like there was a presence helping me figure out the straw in the cup when you were all asleep." His voice was quiet and confessional. "I didn't believe you at first, Mei Ling, when you told me about the voice. Now I think that God must be an invisible presence that touches our minds, personal and intimate like what you experienced. That feels right to me." "I wonder what part the silent voice has to play in all of this," asked Emily. "Maybe it was with us the entire time," said Mei Ling, "giving us the power to conquer Ravana and finish the assignment." Solomon looked at her quizzically. "So you think the voice is causing destruction?" "No," said Mei Ling. "I think the voice is giving us energy and helping us understand the secrets so we can reclaim the best part of ourselves and take it with us." When they arrived at the school, Emily wondered if this was how it looked every weekend when the students weren't there. There was a powerful feeling of abandonment. The building seemed to announce, "I have been left for good. No one is coming back." Solomon used a big rock to break a window at the back of the building near the gymnasium. He was just tall enough to reach the window ledge and pull himself through. Raj propped Mei Ling on his shoulders as he reached for the window ledge and followed Solomon in. Emily accepted Solomon's hand and a gentle push from Raj. Then Solomon and Emily pulled Raj in and they were all inside. They did not speak as they walked through the deserted school, passing familiar classrooms, the cafeteria, and their lockers. The dark hallways were filled with memories that were suddenly precious because they would not be repeated. Finally, they arrived at the library and pushed the door open. Like a well-oiled machine, they sat in their usual chairs, ready to begin. "Everything we've been trying to understand has led us here," said Raj. "The final secret," said Solomon. "The book said the final secret is one precise moment in time. Do you think this is it?" Mei Ling looked at Emily, who gave her a small smile. "Had this happened even a week ago," said Emily, "I would have said I wasn't ready to go." She looked at Raj, and his dark brown eyes smiled back at her. "But the moment has arrived now, exactly when it was meant to," she nodded. "Yes, it's time." Solomon understood that, although all of humanity would leave together, his place was here beside his three friends. They sat for a moment in silence before focusing their minds. There was something deliciously familiar about imagining the rooms in their heads and experiencing the peace that washed over them as they did. It was a path well trod, and they knew easily how to reach their destination. It didn't take long to focus their concentration. Eyes opened, they found themselves standing close together in a valley. The forest around them was densely packed, filled with tall, thin conifers, the same kind that surrounded the school. They stood still, prepared for anything, trusting the scene to emerge at its own pace in front of them. There was a movement in the forest. A figure emerged from the edge of the trees and walked towards them. As he approached, it was obvious that he was from another time and another place. He looked like an Indian prince. He was wearing a knee-length golden tunic with bright buttons that lined the front up to his neck. His head was covered by a brilliant red turban with golden threads woven around the front and a peacock feather in the center. He walked purposefully toward them, an arrow held by his side like a sword. When he was within a few yards, he reached down and touched the arrowhead to the ground. Then he walked around them, using the point of the arrow to etch a line in the earth, encircling them. The sky behind him was black, announcing an oncoming storm. The wind howled and the trees bent low to the ground as if bowing to the prince. He was independent of the storm, unaffected by the wind. Even his clothing did not move when the wind whipped theirs. He moved with the grace and lightness of a ballet dancer. There was nothing rushed about him. "Remember what you have learned," he said, looking each of them in the eye. His eyes were like dark pools of liquid honey, and his smile was sweet and empowering. Then, with quiet dignity, he turned. They watched him walk back into the forest and disappear. Instinctively, they pressed their backs to each other as if to form a shield. They watched the world around them. The sky cracked as lightning split it in two. In the distance, they could see the ocean welling up. Suddenly, the wind that howled around them stopped, and a dead silence descended upon the place where they stood, marking the circle as the eye of the storm. "Is this the final destruction?" Emily asked. Raj spoke calmly. "No, this is regeneration. It's time for the earth to be renewed so we can start fresh." "Mother Nature has to clean up after the mess we've made," said Mei Ling. "This is the final life review for the planet, the feather of truth moment," Solomon said. "I'm glad we know it's a new start and not the end," said Emily. "I'd like to see a new world," said Mei Ling. "Now everyone will get to see it," said Solomon. "I don't think anyone believed it was really possible to make a new world, even though everyone wanted it," Emily said. "Maybe that's why we were picked," said Raj. "Somehow we believed it was possible, although I wouldn't have said that about myself until this moment." "I wouldn't have said that about you either, Raj," Solomon laughed kindly, "but now I would." "Are you scared?" asked Emily. "No," said Solomon. "I know we won't lose anyone, even if we'll look different next time we see each other." "I told my mom we're spirits," said Mei Ling. "I hope she remembers." "I think knowing is the real protection," said Emily, thinking of Tessa's delight when she'd heard about the diamond field. Suddenly there was a great roar, like a thunderstorm approaching. The ground around them cracked, and the earth broke away as if a giant meat cleaver had slashed it apart. They stood on an island with a gaping hole surrounding them like a giant moat, marveling at Mother Nature's power. The earth heaved up into the air and crashed down, breaking apart in huge chunks around their circle. It looked like a massive tilling project that was turning the land to regenerate it, restoring its energy for the seeds to flourish in the new garden. A wall of water rushed toward them like a tsunami they had seen replayed 1,000 times on television. "This is it," said Solomon. "It's all coming apart." "Just when we're coming together," Raj smiled. Around them, the air was filled with sparks of light, like fireflies. They danced across the sky, then began to swirl together upwards in unison, creating a sparkling cloud. There was a spotlight from above that seemed to be pulling them upwards. "Just like in the diamond field," said Mei Ling. "I feel like we do when we meditate," said Solomon. Raj smiled. "See you on the other side," he said. "Yes," said Emily. "Let's go." They felt their awareness drawing inwards, the way they had done many times together in the library. It was a familiar sensation of peace and concentrated power. The last thing they heard was the calm sweetness of the silent voice. "Come." In the same moment, each of them willingly let go. Chapter 20. Epilogue. "Humans think that heaven is another place," the keeper of the earth said to his dearest friend. "It doesn't occur to them that it's a different time period for the earth. Now they'll see for themselves." "The children did well," bubbled water, fresh as morning dew. "It is now time for harmony once again." "At last," he said, delight in his voice, "we can return to our original form." The keeper of the earth stepped out of the council room into the scene in front of him. As his feet touched the green grass, he transformed into earth and settled around the roots of the nearest tree. The keeper of the water stepped from the council room and flowed into the crystalline pond. The earth was rich with potential, like the promise of a spring morning. The dewdrop freshness of the air made the leaves and grass sparkle, their colors vibrant with life. Flowers bloomed, painting the landscape around them with the lush hue of natural beauty. A slight breeze carried the sweet perfume of lilac and lavender and thyme. The sun shone with a steady, warm glow. She stood in the sun, gazing at the splendor of the natural world around her. Her face shone with an inner beauty that illuminated her body and surrounded it with light. The light spread around her head, forming a radiant crown. Her eyes were full of love. He walked toward her, his hand outstretched, his loveliness equal to hers. She took his hand and joined him to walk along the pathway through the garden to the gathering place where their friends, families, and community awaited them. A peacock strolled gracefully across the path in front of them to the edge of the pond, sweet with the scent of jasmine. Another pair joined them, their faces mirroring the beauty of the world around them. Diamond light sparkled through their eyes, expressing the innocence of a fresh start. The wisdom of the 7 secrets that had shaped their character was carried now as subconscious memories. The world in front of them had formed itself around their new consciousness. They walked together in silence, and the sound of tinkling bells filled the air as the trees and fragrant flowers heralded their arrival. The 4 friends stopped beside the clear pool of water. They turned to each other and smiled, deep smiles of recognition, basking in the certainty that they belonged together, here, in this place, at this time. The end. The beginning.